At 2:17 a.m., Nash Simmons, a 41-year-old night shift maintenance technician in downtown Denver, was kneeling beside a malfunctioning freight elevator with grease on his hands and a torn sleeve on his jacket. Most people who knew him believed the same thing his wife Lauren had repeated for 7 years: he was worthless. They saw the old Ford Taurus, the discount groceries, the silent man who never defended himself. What they didn't know was that Nash had spent months quietly collecting evidence that could destroy a multi-million-dollar tech company. Then his phone vibrated. "This is Olivia Grant from Forbes." The wrench slipped from his fingers. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, let me know your country and local time in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where patience, truth, and preparation matter more than noise, subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. The first time Lauren Simmons called Nash worthless in public, they had been married for only 4 months. It happened inside a crowded Home Depot in Aurora. A cashier asked if they wanted help loading several bags of landscaping stone into their SUV. Before Nash could answer, Lauren laughed. "Trust me, if we wait for him to move fast, we'll be here all day." The cashier smiled awkwardly. Nash loaded every bag himself. Lauren scrolled through her phone. That should have been a warning. But back then, Nash still believed difficult seasons eventually passed. 7 years later, the comments had become part of the furniture. Permanent. Expected. As ordinary as the kitchen table. Every morning started almost the same way. The Simmons house sat on a quiet street 20 minutes outside downtown Denver. It wasn't large. 3 bedrooms. Beige siding. A backyard that needed work. At 6:30 each morning, Lauren prepared coffee before leaving for Crestline Dynamics, one of Colorado's fastest-growing technology firms. At 6:45, Nash arrived home from his maintenance shift. Their schedules barely overlapped. Most couples might have considered that a blessing. For Nash, it simply meant there were fewer witnesses. One Tuesday morning, he stepped into the kitchen carrying a paper grocery bag from King Soopers. Lauren glanced inside. Store-brand cereal, discount bread, frozen vegetables. She shook her head. 41 years old and still shopping like a college student. Nash placed the groceries on the counter. He didn't answer. Lauren took another sip of coffee. "Do you know what Megan's husband bought her last week?" No response. "A Tesla." Nash quietly put the milk into the refrigerator. "Do you know what you bought me?" "Nothing. A coupon for discounted windshield wipers." She laughed at her own joke. Nash closed the refrigerator door. His expression never changed. Years earlier, he would have defended himself. Explained. Argued. Asked questions. Now he simply listened. Because experience had taught him something. Arguments rarely changed people who enjoyed winning them. Lauren watched him leave the kitchen. "You know what's funny?" she called after him. He paused. "You don't even seem embarrassed anymore." For a second, Nash considered answering. Then he continued down the hallway. The conversation ended there. At least for him. Not for Lauren. The criticism appeared everywhere. At birthday parties, at restaurants, at neighborhood barbecues, at holiday gatherings. Sometimes it arrived disguised as humor. Sometimes it wasn't disguised at all. The following Saturday, Lauren's sister hosted a family cookout. Around 20 relatives crowded into a backyard beneath strings of decorative lights. Nash stood beside the grill helping flip burgers. Lauren stood near the patio discussing work. Her voice carried. Crestline's valuation might hit $300 million next year. Several relatives looked impressed. Someone asked if she planned to celebrate. Lauren nodded. "I should. Lord knows somebody in this marriage needs a successful career." The group laughed. Not loudly. Not maliciously. Just enough. The kind of laughter that tells everyone which side they're supposed to be on. Nash heard every word. He continued flipping burgers. The smell of charcoal drifted through the air. One of Lauren's uncles approached him. "She's just joking, son." Nash smiled politely. Of course. The older man seemed relieved. People preferred easy explanations. They preferred jokes. They preferred simple stories. The story everyone had accepted was that Lauren was ambitious while Nash lacked direction. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wondered why a man who worked 6 nights every week never complained. Nobody wondered why he spent his afternoons reading instead of watching television. Nobody wondered why shelves inside the garage were filled with notebooks. The assumptions had already been made, and assumptions were comfortable. At Crestline Dynamics, Lauren's career kept rising. 3 promotions in 5 years, industry conferences, executive retreats, networking dinners, professional photos posted online. Each achievement increased her confidence, and each achievement seemed to reduce her patience for Nash. By autumn, her social media accounts had become a carefully curated showcase of success. Luxury restaurants, corporate events, airport lounges, conference stages. There was almost no evidence she was married, except when Nash became useful as a punchline. One evening, while scrolling through her phone before work, Nash saw a post, a photograph from a company fundraiser. Lauren stood beside several executives. The caption read, "Surround yourself with people who motivate you to grow." A comment underneath asked where her husband worked. Lauren replied with a laughing emoji. "He's still figuring that out." The comment had received 47 likes. Nash stared at the screen. Then he locked the phone. His pulse remained steady. But something else happened. He remembered. Every insult, every public embarrassment, every conversation, not emotionally, factually, almost like a database, time, location, people present, exact wording. The habit had developed years earlier. Without realizing it, he had become an observer, a collector of details. That same attention followed him to work. The Denver Commerce Center occupied 12 floors near Union Station. Law firms rented several floors. Consulting firms occupied others. A cybersecurity company leased part of the 8th floor. Crestline Dynamics rented the entire 9th and 10th floors. Nash knew every hallway, every utility room, every maintenance access panel. Most employees never noticed him. That was fine. Invisible people saw things. On a cold Thursday night in November, a winter storm rolled across Denver. The parking garage sat nearly empty. Wind rattled the glass walls. At 1:12 a.m., Nash received a maintenance ticket from the 10th floor. Server room cooling issue. Nothing unusual. He took the freight elevator upstairs. The server room sat behind a secured corridor used by Crestline's IT staff. Inside, rows of equipment hummed beneath fluorescent lighting. A faulty cooling sensor had triggered the alert. Nash knelt beside the unit. 15 minutes later, the problem was fixed. He was preparing to leave when he noticed something strange. A small black external drive sat beneath a storage cabinet. Half hidden behind a bundle of cables, dust coated one side. No identification label, no inventory sticker, no company tag. Someone had either forgotten it or intentionally abandoned it. Nash picked it up. The device felt heavier than expected. He turned it over in his hand. No markings, no name, nothing. For a moment he considered leaving it where it was. Then another thought occurred. Server rooms didn't accidentally lose storage devices, not in companies worth hundreds of millions. He slipped the drive into his maintenance bag. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows. The building remained silent. Most of Denver was asleep. Nash stood alone in the corridor staring at the black device resting inside his bag. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years moved quietly through him. Instinct. The same instinct that once made him a respected systems engineer. The same instinct that told him something wasn't right. He looked toward the locked executive offices at the end of the hallway. Then toward the elevator. The drive remained in his hand for several seconds. Finally, he placed it back inside the bag and headed downstairs. What Nash Simmons didn't know yet was that a single forgotten piece of hardware was about to connect every insult, every lie, every hidden transaction, and every person who believed he was worthless. And before sunrise, he would discover that Lauren's name was far closer to the center of that story than he could have imagined. Nash didn't examine the drive immediately. That was the first reason he had survived situations that ruined other people. Curiosity made mistakes. Discipline found answers. At 7:14 a.m., he parked his aging Ford Taurus in the driveway of the house he technically still shared with Lauren. The November sky above Aurora was gray and heavy. Snow clouds hung low over the distant Front Range. Inside the house was empty. Lauren had already left for Crestline Dynamics. Nash placed his keys on the kitchen counter. The black external drive remained inside his maintenance bag. For several minutes, he ignored it. He made coffee, fed the neighbor's cat that regularly visited his back porch, checked the mailbox. Only then did he walk into the garage. The garage looked ordinary from the outside. Storage bins, old tools, a lawnmower that barely worked. But behind a row of shelves sat something few people knew existed. A workstation. 3 monitors. 2 encrypted backup servers. Professional-grade recovery software. Data analysis programs. For 7 years, Lauren had described Nash as a man who never accomplished anything. If she had walked into that garage and truly understood what she was seeing, she would have realized how wrong she was. The workstation wasn't a hobby. It was a remnant, a fragment of the life Nash once lived. He sat down, connected the drive, waited. The system recognized it immediately. No password, no encryption. That alone felt unusual. Most corporate storage devices carried multiple security layers. This one didn't. The screen populated with folders, hundreds of them, spreadsheets, PDF reports, internal presentations, financial summaries, email archives. Nash leaned forward. His instincts activated immediately. He wasn't reading like a curious employee. He was reading like an engineer, looking for patterns, looking for inconsistencies, looking for things that didn't belong. Within 20 minutes, he found the first one. A revenue report from Crestline Dynamics. The company claimed quarterly software sales of $83 million. A second spreadsheet from the same period showed customer invoices totaling barely $56 million. Nash checked the dates. They matched. He checked revision histories. Also matched. The difference exceeded $27 million. He sat back. Most people might have assumed a clerical error. Nash didn't. Because errors had fingerprints, this looked intentional. He opened another folder, then another, and another. The same pattern appeared repeatedly. Revenue projections inflated. Client contracts duplicated. Subscription counts altered. Projected earnings reported as completed earnings. Each document by itself raised questions. Together they painted a picture. A very dangerous picture. By noon, Nash had consumed enough coffee to make his hands shake. He barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the screens. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the garage, the truth slowly assembled itself. Crestline Dynamics wasn't simply exaggerating success. Someone appeared to be manufacturing it. The company was preparing for another funding round. Investors expected growth. Growth attracted money. Money increased valuation. Valuation created headlines. Headlines attracted more investors. The cycle continued, unless the foundation underneath it was fake. Nash spent another 2 hours verifying every assumption. He didn't trust instincts alone. Never had. Data required confirmation. He cross-referenced reports, compared versions, tracked file histories, examined metadata. Eventually, he found something that made him stop moving altogether. An internal executive presentation. Confidential. Restricted distribution. prepared for board members. The file estimated Crestline's actual revenue. The numbers were dramatically lower than those presented publicly. Not slightly lower. Massively lower. Someone inside the company knew the truth, and someone inside the company was actively hiding it. Nash stared at the screen, then opened a fresh notebook. The first entry appeared at exactly 2:43 p.m. Document title: Date created. Author, location, verification notes. He wrote everything by hand. Old habits. Digital records could disappear. Paper survived. The notebook slowly filled. As daylight faded, Nash moved to the next category. Emails. Thousands of them. Most were ordinary. Meeting schedules, project updates, conference arrangements, budget approvals. Then came the executive correspondence, private conversations, restricted threads, messages exchanged between senior leadership. Nash searched key phrases: revenue, forecast, investor, adjustment, projection. The results multiplied rapidly. His eyes narrowed. There it was, language designed to sound harmless. Optimize reporting, revenue alignment, strategic presentation, investor perception. Corporate vocabulary often functioned like camouflage. People rarely wrote, "Let's commit fraud." Instead, they created softer phrases, safer phrases, phrases that sounded professional. Nash had spent years learning how to recognize them. One email chain stretched across 17 pages. Executives discussed discrepancies in quarterly earnings. Several participants expressed concern. One suggested delaying investor presentations. Another warned of regulatory risks. Then a final response appeared. The sender instructed everyone to proceed. No delays, no revisions, no discussion. The funding round would continue. Nash copied the sender's name into his notebook. Blake Mercer, Chief Financial Officer. The name appeared everywhere. Authorizations, approvals, strategy meetings, financial summaries. Mercer sat near the center of everything. But he wasn't alone. Nash continued digging. Hours passed. The garage grew darker. Only monitor light illuminated the room. By evening, he had uncovered enough evidence to concern any investigator. But one question remained unanswered. Why had the drive been abandoned? People involved in something this large usually protected information carefully. Yet here sat a treasure chest of internal records, forgotten beneath a cabinet. The explanation didn't make sense, unless someone had panicked, unless someone had copied data quickly, unless someone had intended to retrieve it later. The possibility lingered in the back of Nash's mind. Around 9 p.m., he opened another email archive, a folder labeled Executive Communications. His cursor moved through dozens of names. Board members, consultants, financial advisors. Then he saw a familiar name. His hand froze. Nash Simmons. For a moment, he assumed coincidence. Crestline employed hundreds of people. She was a senior marketing director. Naturally, she appeared in communications. But curiosity pushed him deeper. He opened the thread, then another, then a third. The room seemed quieter. Each message increased the pressure inside his chest. Lauren wasn't copied passively. She wasn't observing. She was participating, offering recommendations, reviewing investor messaging, approving public statements, helping shape narratives. One email in particular made Nash read it twice, then 3 times. A discussion about reporting company performance. Executives debated how aggressively to present projected growth. Lauren responded near the bottom. Her words were brief, direct. Perception matters more than details at this stage. The message carried her company's signature, her employee identification, her timestamp. There was no mistake. Nash leaned back slowly. 7 years. 7 years listening to Lauren describe him as useless. 7 years hearing lectures about ambition, success, intelligence, professional achievement. And now her name sat inside a growing collection of documents connected to what appeared to be a massive financial deception. The realization didn't make him angry. Not immediately. Instead, he felt something colder, more dangerous: certainty. Because evidence didn't care about opinions. Evidence didn't care who earned more money, who had a better title, who controlled conversations. Evidence simply existed, and now he had it. Outside darkness covered the neighborhood. Inside the garage, Nash opened a new folder. Its title was simple: Investor Strategy. He clicked. The first document loaded. And before he reached the second page, he discovered something that would transform this from a corporate scandal into a personal betrayal. Something involving Blake Mercer. Something involving Lauren. Something neither of them ever imagined Nash would find. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Technically, it wasn't addressed to Nash. Lauren left it on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of fruit and a stack of unopened mail. A cream-colored card. Heavy paper. Gold lettering. Executive Leadership Appreciation Dinner. The Blackstone Chop House, downtown Denver. Friday, 7 o'clock. Nash noticed it while pouring coffee. Lauren was standing near the refrigerator checking messages on her phone. "Do I need to be there?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Unfortunately." Nash waited. Lauren finally glanced at him. "My department is hosting several investors. Some executives are bringing spouses. You want me to come?" "I want you to avoid embarrassing me." The words landed softly, like they always did. Not because they hurt less, because repetition had worn away the surprise. Lauren grabbed her purse. "Try to wear something without grease stains." The front door closed. The house became quiet. Nash finished his coffee. Then his eyes drifted toward the notebook hidden inside the garage. The notebook that now contained dozens of pages documenting Crestline's internal records. Every day brought new discoveries, new inconsistencies, new questions. And now for the first time he would be sitting in the same room as several people whose names appeared repeatedly inside those files, including Blake Mercer, the man whose digital fingerprints seemed to touch everything. Friday arrived cold and windy. Downtown Denver glittered beneath holiday lights. The Blackstone Chop House occupied the ground floor of a restored historic building near Larimer Square. Dark wood, leather seating, crystal chandeliers, private dining rooms, the kind of restaurant where investors liked making decisions over expensive steaks. Nash parked his Ford Taurus 2 blocks away. Most of the vehicles near the entrance cost more than his annual salary. He wasn't surprised. Inside, a hostess guided them toward a private room. Lauren walked ahead, confident, polished, perfectly dressed. People greeted her immediately. Executives, managers, consultants. Everyone seemed happy to see her. Nash received polite nods. Nothing more. That was fine. Invisible remained useful. The private dining room overlooked downtown streets glowing beneath winter lights. A long table stretched across the center. Name cards marked every seat. Lauren sat near the executives. Nash sat near the far end. Almost an afterthought. The arrangement appeared accidental. It wasn't. A young investor across from him introduced himself. Jason Reed. "Nash Simmons," Jason smiled politely. "What do you do?" Before Nash could answer, Lauren answered for him. "He fixes things." Several people chuckled. Jason shifted awkwardly. "Oh." Lauren sipped wine. "Elevators, air conditioning, broken toilets, whatever the building needs." More laughter. Not cruel, not exactly, but enough. The conversation moved on. Nash unfolded his napkin. The waiter poured water. Outside, traffic moved through the city below. Inside, the evening continued. For the next hour, Nash listened. People often revealed more than they intended when they assumed nobody important was paying attention, especially after alcohol arrived. Investor conversations drifted between technology trends and financial forecasts. Crestline dynamics occupied much of the discussion. Its growth, its expansion plans, its upcoming funding round, its future valuation. The numbers sounded impressive, extremely impressive, almost identical to the projections Nash had already examined inside the abandoned drive. That observation alone concerned him, because many of those projections weren't real, at least not according to internal documents. Then, Blake Mercer arrived. The room reacted immediately. Conversations paused. Executives stood. Investors smiled. Mercer moved through the room with practiced confidence. Tall, expensive suit, silver hair. The kind of executive who understood exactly how much power he possessed. He shook hands, accepted compliments, made everyone feel noticed. Eventually, he reached Lauren. His smile widened slightly. Only slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Nash did. Mercer leaned closer than necessary. Lauren. Blake. Professional. Friendly. Normal. At least on the surface, yet something felt different. A fraction too familiar. A fraction too comfortable. The interaction lasted only seconds. Then Mercer continued greeting others. Dinner began. Filet mignon, wine, small talk, corporate optimism. Nash listened, observed, collected details, exactly as he always did. Around 8:30, discussion shifted toward Crestline's future. One investor asked whether expansion targets remained realistic. Mercer answered confidently, "Absolutely." Another executive nodded. "The metrics support it." Several people expressed enthusiasm. Then Lauren joined the conversation. "The market believes in momentum." Mercer smiled. "Exactly." Something about the exchange caught Nash's attention. Not the words themselves. The timing. Neither needed explanation. Neither clarified details. Both already understood the subject, as if portions of the conversation had occurred elsewhere, privately. Nash filed the observation away. 10 minutes later, another appeared, then another. Small things. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Mercer frequently looked toward Lauren when discussing sensitive topics. Lauren anticipated his comments before he made them. Their reactions seemed synchronized, a subtle rhythm, invisible unless someone specifically watched for it. Nash watched. The evening progressed. Eventually, investors moved toward the bar area. Conversations fragmented into smaller groups. The atmosphere relaxed. Nash stood near a window overlooking downtown. The city lights reflected against the glass. Behind him, voices blended together. Laughter, business, politics, money. Then he heard Lauren. She stood several feet away speaking with two investors. One asked about her husband. Lauren smiled, the same smile Nash had seen countless times. "I married him because I thought potential mattered." The investors laughed politely. Lauren shrugged. "Turns out potential doesn't pay mortgages." More laughter. Nash remained motionless. His reflection stared back from the window. Denver glittered beyond the glass. The city seemed very far away. One investor glanced toward Nash. Embarrassment flickered across his face. Lauren didn't notice, or didn't care. She continued speaking. "The funny thing is, he still thinks hard work solves everything." Another laugh. Then the conversation drifted elsewhere. Nash turned back toward the room. No anger appeared on his face, no visible reaction. But another entry formed inside the mental ledger he had maintained for years. Date, location, witnesses, exact wording, stored away. Near 9 o'clock, guests began preparing to leave. Coats appeared, valet tickets emerged, handshakes multiplied. Nash waited near the entrance while Lauren finished a conversation. Mercer stood beside her. Several executives surrounded them. Then something happened. Tiny, brief, almost meaningless, unless someone had spent months examining evidence. Mercer placed his hand against Lauren's lower back. Just for a second. Not enough to attract attention. Not enough to appear inappropriate. But enough. The gesture carried familiarity, possession, comfort. Neither reacted, which made it worse. People reacted to unusual behavior. This felt practiced, routine, normal between them. Mercer removed his hand immediately. The conversation continued. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nash did. Every detail, every expression, every movement. For a moment, Lauren looked toward Mercer, a look lasting less than a second. Then it vanished. The same way fingerprints vanish from polished glass. Most people would dismiss it. Nash couldn't, because the feeling in his chest matched the feeling he experienced while examining suspicious data. Pattern recognition. One clue meant little. Multiple clues created structure, and structures revealed truth. The valet brought Lauren's car around. They drove home mostly in silence. Holiday lights blurred across the windshield. Lauren checked emails from her phone. Nash focused on the road. Eventually, she glanced over. "You barely spoke tonight." Nash shrugged. "I was listening." Lauren laughed softly. "To what?" The question lingered between them. Nash considered answering. Instead, he returned his attention to traffic. Outside, snow drifted across the highway. Inside the vehicle, silence settled again. But long after Lauren fell asleep that night, Nash sat alone inside the garage. The notebook remained open. A fresh page waited beneath the glow of a desk lamp. At the top, he wrote 2 names: Lauren Simmons, Blake Mercer. Then he added a series of observations from dinner. Individually, none proved anything. Together, they suggested a possibility that extended far beyond fraudulent financial reports, a possibility involving betrayal. And as Nash stared at the names written across the page, he realized the next answers he uncovered might not come from company records. They might come from his own marriage. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil dust and old paper. Nash sat alone beneath the glow of a desk lamp. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches lining the neighborhood street. Inside, 2 names remained written across the top of a notebook page: Lauren Simmons, Blake Mercer. The page sat untouched for nearly 10 minutes, not because Nash lacked ideas, because experience had taught him a simple rule. When emotions arrived, stop working. Facts deserved a clear mind. Eventually, he closed the notebook, shut down the monitors, and went to sleep. 3 hours later, he woke with the same question still waiting. Not whether Lauren had betrayed him, not whether Blake Mercer was involved. The evidence wasn't there yet. The real question was what to do next. The answer required revisiting a chapter of his life most people never knew existed, including Lauren, especially Lauren. Years before becoming a maintenance technician, Nash Simmons had been something entirely different. At 31, he worked in Seattle as a senior systems engineer for a rapidly growing software company. Back then, his future looked predictable. Strong salary, company stock, industry respect, a clear path upward. Friends described him as brilliant. Managers trusted him. Recruiters called regularly. The trajectory seemed obvious. Then, he discovered irregularities. Small ones at first. Revenue numbers that didn't align. Invoices that appeared duplicated. Contract values adjusted without explanation. The patterns looked familiar now. Uncomfortably familiar. 10 years earlier, Nash had done exactly what most people imagined honest employees should do. He reported the issue internally, documented everything, followed procedures, trusted the system. The system responded, just not the way he expected. Meetings suddenly excluded him. Projects disappeared. Promotions vanished. Performance reviews changed. People who once praised his work stopped returning calls. No one accused him directly. They didn't need to. Isolation accomplished the same goal. Within 18 months, his corporate career was effectively over. He eventually resigned. The company settled several investigations years later. Executives paid fines. Lawyers collected fees. The news cycle moved on. But Nash learned something permanent. Truth alone wasn't enough. Truth required proof. Proof required documentation. Documentation required patience. That lesson never left him. It sat quietly beneath every decision he made afterward, including the one now unfolding inside his garage. Saturday afternoon found him reviewing Crestline records again. This time, he focused less on fraud and more on process. How had the documents been created? Who approved them? Who modified them? Who had access? The answers mattered, because accusations without structure became opinions. Nash wanted structure. He spent hours tracing file histories. Patterns emerged quickly. Nearly every questionable financial report passed through Blake Mercer's office. That wasn't surprising. Mercer served as chief financial officer. What surprised Nash was how often another department appeared in related communications. Marketing, investor relations, public messaging, the division Lauren managed. Her digital fingerprints weren't everywhere, but they appeared often enough to concern him, especially in communications designed for investors. By evening, Nash had identified 14 separate email chains involving both Mercer and Lauren. Some were perfectly ordinary. Others were less comfortable. One message discussed maintaining confidence through narrative consistency. Another referenced investor concerns about slowing growth. Lauren suggested emphasizing future expansion rather than current performance. The recommendation alone wasn't illegal. It wasn't even unusual. Marketing professionals shaped perception every day. But within the broader context, it felt different, like one piece of a much larger machine. Nash copied each reference into his notebook, methodically, patiently. Then he reached for his phone. The contact remained buried deep inside his address book, untouched for nearly 3 years. Rebecca Hart, Denver attorney, age 52, former corporate compliance specialist, one of the few people who had believed him during the Seattle disaster. Nash stared at the number, then pressed call. The phone rang twice, 3 times, 4. Finally, a voice answered. Nash Simmons. No greeting, no surprise, just recognition. Rebecca always had an exceptional memory. Hello, Rebecca. A brief pause followed. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. I know. Something wrong? Nash looked toward the monitors. Rows of files remained open, spreadsheets, emails, reports, evidence. Maybe. Another pause. Rebecca understood pauses. Good attorneys often did. How big? Nash leaned back. Bigger than I expected. Silence. Then a short sigh. Let's start with the basics. For the next 40 minutes, Nash explained everything. The abandoned drive, the financial discrepancies, the executive communications, the investor reports, the metadata, the backups. Rebecca interrupted only occasionally. Questions, clarifications, requests for specific details. Nothing more. When he finally finished, the line remained silent for several seconds. That silence concerned him. Rebecca rarely hesitated. Finally, she spoke. You still have the original drive? Yes. Untouched. I created forensic copies. Good. What do you think? Another pause, then Rebecca's voice became noticeably sharper. The same thing you're thinking. Nash didn't answer. He already knew. Rebecca continued. If these documents are authentic, this isn't accounting sloppiness. No, this isn't aggressive forecasting. No, this could become a federal matter. The word settled heavily in the room. Federal matter. Not speculation, not gossip, not corporate drama. Federal. The distinction mattered. Nash stared at the notebook. His handwriting covered nearly 60 pages, and growing. What should I do? He asked. Rebecca laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because she already knew the answer. The thing you always do, Nash understood immediately. Document, verify, preserve. Wait. Emotion encouraged action. Experience encouraged preparation. Rebecca continued. Do not confront anyone. I wasn't planning to. Do not contact executives. I won't. Do not tell Lauren. That answer arrived instantly. I won't. Rebecca's tone softened slightly. Good. The conversation shifted toward legal procedures, evidence preservation, chain of custody, potential whistleblower protections, data verification, risk assessment. By the end of the call, Nash had 3 pages of additional notes, and one growing realization. This situation extended far beyond a troubled marriage, far beyond public humiliation, far beyond 7 years of being called worthless. The evidence pointed toward something much larger, something capable of damaging a company worth hundreds of millions. Before ending the call, Rebecca asked one final question. Nash? Yeah. Are you emotionally involved in this? He looked around the garage. The question deserved honesty. Lauren's name appears in the files. Rebecca didn't sound surprised. I assumed as much. Nash rubbed his eyes. For the first time all evening, exhaustion appeared. Not anger, not heartbreak, just exhaustion. I don't know how deep she is. Then don't guess. I'm not. Good. Rebecca's voice hardened again. Facts first. Nash smiled faintly. Some lessons never changed. Facts first. The call ended. Night settled over Aurora. The neighborhood grew quiet. Inside the garage, Nash reviewed his notes one final time. The evidence remained incomplete. The picture wasn't finished, but enough pieces existed to reveal its outline. And the outline looked dangerous. Very dangerous. As he prepared to shut down for the evening, an encrypted folder caught his attention. One he hadn't examined before. The title was simple: Executive Compensation. Nash clicked. Several documents appeared. Bonus schedules, payment authorizations, private agreements. Most seemed routine. Then one file loaded. A transfer authorization, large amount, unusual routing, approved through an entity registered outside Colorado. Nash studied the details. A second authorization followed, then a third, each linked to financial channels that didn't appear on official company disclosures. His eyes narrowed. Slowly. Carefully. Because he recognized what he was looking at. Hidden money. And wherever hidden money existed, motives usually followed. At the bottom of the third document, another familiar name appeared. Not Blake Mercer. Not a board member. Not an investor. Lauren Simmons. Nash stared at the screen, then reached for his notebook again. Because the next layer of truth wasn't hiding inside company projections anymore. It was hiding inside bank accounts. And that discovery would soon reveal exactly how far Lauren had been preparing for a future without him. The first hidden payment appeared 6 months earlier. The second appeared 4 months later. The third arrived only 3 weeks ago. Nash stared at the screen. The numbers weren't enormous by corporate standards. $25,000, $30,000, $40,000. Individually, they might have escaped attention. Together, they created a pattern, and patterns interested Nash far more than numbers. The transfers originated from a company called Silver Ridge Consulting. The name sounded ordinary, generic, forgettable. Exactly the kind of name someone might choose if they preferred not to attract attention. Nash copied the information into his notebook. Then he opened another browser window. State business records, corporate filings, registration databases, public information first. Always public information first. Years ago, he had learned another important lesson. People often expose themselves without realizing it. Most mistakes weren't hidden. Most mistakes were simply ignored. Within 20 minutes, Silver Ridge Consulting appeared. Registered in Nevada. No public website. No employees listed. Minimal corporate activity. A shell, or something very close to one. Nash continued digging. Cross-referencing names, addresses, registration agents, financial records. Eventually, he found another connection. Not direct, not obvious, but enough. Silver Ridge shared a registration service with 2 additional entities. Both appeared inside documents from the abandoned drive. His pulse remained calm, but his attention sharpened. That rarely happened unless something mattered. By midnight, a rough picture had emerged. Money moved from corporate channels, through intermediary entities, into accounts connected to senior personnel. Exactly why remained unclear. But the flow existed, and Lauren's name sat uncomfortably close to it. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Lauren stood in the kitchen preparing coffee. Nash watched quietly from across the room. 7 years together. 7 years of routines. 7 years of conversations. And now he found himself observing her differently. Not emotionally, analytically. The same way he studied evidence. Lauren checked messages while waiting for the coffee machine. Her expression remained relaxed, confident, unconcerned. No visible signs of stress. No indication that she worried about investigations, or hidden payments, or abandoned hard drives. Nothing. A notification appeared on her phone. She smiled, briefly, then locked the screen. Nash noticed. He noticed everything now. Not because he wanted revenge, because information mattered. Lauren placed a mug on the counter. "Are you working tonight?" "Yes." "Good." The answer arrived too quickly, too casually. Lauren didn't seem to notice. She took a sip of coffee. "Crestline has investors visiting this week." Nash nodded. "I know." Lauren glanced at him. "Of course you know." A small smile crossed her face. "You fix the building." The remark wasn't particularly harsh, not compared to previous years, yet something about it felt different now. Perhaps because Nash knew things she didn't. Perhaps because the illusion had already started breaking. Lauren left 10 minutes later. The house became quiet. Nash waited, then walked into the garage. He spent the next several hours tracing financial records. The process felt slow, tedious, necessary. Eventually, he discovered something more alarming than the payments themselves: timing. Every transfer coincided with important investor announcements, funding rounds, valuation increases, public growth reports. The pattern repeated with remarkable consistency. Positive news appeared. Money moved shortly afterward. Coincidence remained possible. But coincidence weakened with repetition. Rebecca Hart agreed. They met Tuesday afternoon inside her downtown Denver office. The building overlooked Civic Center Park, Old brick walls, dark wood shelves, stacks of legal files. Rebecca studied printed documents spread across a conference table. Occasionally she made notes. Occasionally she frowned. Neither reaction encouraged optimism. Finally, she removed her glasses. "You're documenting everything?" "Yes." "Original files preserved?" "Yes." "Backups is 3 copies?" Rebecca nodded. "Good." Then she tapped one particular page. Lauren's name appeared near the bottom. "Tell me about her." Nash considered the question. Not because it was difficult, because it was complicated. "She's ambitious." Rebecca waited. "Very ambitious." "That's not illegal." "No." "What else?" Nash looked through the office window. Snow drifted slowly across downtown streets. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Life continued. Normal. Ordinary. Meanwhile, inside this room, something much larger was unfolding. Finally, he answered. "She believes success determines value." Rebecca remained silent. Nash continued. "Everything becomes a measurement. Money. Money. Status. Status. Titles. Especially titles." Rebecca made another note. "And you—" Nash smiled faintly. "I stopped competing years ago." That probably frustrated her. "It did." Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she returned to the documents. Several minutes passed. Eventually she spoke again. "Nash." "Yeah. If these records are legitimate, Lauren may have exposure." The words carried weight. Legal exposure. Financial exposure. Potential criminal exposure. Nash already understood. Hearing someone else say it felt different, more real. Rebecca leaned back. "I'm not saying she's guilty." "I know. I'm saying her name appears repeatedly." Nash nodded. "Facts first. Always. No assumptions, no conclusions, just facts." The meeting ended an hour later. As Nash walked toward the parking garage, his phone vibrated. "Lauren." He answered. "What is it?" "No greeting, no hello, just business." "Typical. Where are you about downtown?" "I need tax records." "For what?" A pause. Brief. Almost invisible. Then Lauren answered. "Planning." Nash frowned slightly. "What kind of planning?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Future planning." The phrase lingered. Future planning. Vague. Careful. Intentional. Nash felt the same instinctive warning he experienced while reviewing suspicious spreadsheets. Something underneath the surface. Something incomplete. "I'll look for them." "Good." The call ended. That night, after Lauren went to bed, Nash sat alone at the kitchen table. The house remained silent. Only the refrigerator hummed softly. Lauren's laptop sat unattended on the counter. She often left it there. Normally, Nash ignored it. Tonight he didn't. Not because he wanted secrets, because warning signs kept accumulating. Tax records, financial transfers, hidden entities, future planning. The pattern demanded attention. The laptop required a password. Nash already knew it. Not because he had ever used it, because Lauren reused the same password variations for years. The screen unlocked immediately. His stomach tightened. Not from guilt, from expectation. People rarely prepared surprises without leaving evidence. He searched cautiously. Emails, documents, downloads. Nothing unusual at first. Then he found a folder. Personal. Inside sat several PDF files. Legal consultations. Asset summaries. Property evaluations. Divorce preparation checklists. Nash stopped moving. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. He opened another document. Then another. Dates stretched back nearly 11 months. 11. Lauren hadn't begun planning recently. She had been planning for almost a year. Methodically, carefully, the realization settled heavily inside him. Not because the marriage was ending. That possibility had existed for years. Because of the strategy, the preparation, the deception. One document outlined projected outcomes. Another discussed asset positioning. A third contained attorney recommendations. Then Nash found the email. Short, direct, sent 2 weeks earlier. To a divorce attorney. Subject line timing. He opened it. The message contained only one sentence. He read it once, then again, then a third time. He won't see this coming. Nash stared at the screen. The kitchen remained silent. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows. Inside, certainty settled into place. Lauren wasn't reacting to problems. She wasn't considering options. She wasn't uncertain. She had already chosen her path, and she believed Nash remained exactly what she had called him for 7 years. Worthless, predictable, easy to defeat. What Lauren didn't understand was that the man she thought she knew no longer existed, because while she had spent 11 months preparing for divorce, Nash had spent months documenting something far more dangerous. And soon, both timelines were going to collide. The lock clicked, but the door didn't open. Nash stood on the front porch staring at the handle. Snowflakes drifted through the beam of the porch light. The neighborhood remained silent beneath a pale winter sky. For a second he assumed he had used the wrong key. His night shift had ended only 20 minutes earlier. He was tired, cold, running on coffee and 4 hours of sleep. He inserted the key again. Turned it. Nothing. The lock had been changed. Nash stepped back. A slow breath escaped into the freezing air. Then he noticed the boxes. 3 cardboard boxes. 1 black duffel bag. A plastic storage container. Everything sat neatly beside the garage. His clothes, his books, his tools, his belongings. The realization arrived instantly. Lauren had done it. Not tomorrow, not next week, not after a discussion. Now. The front door opened before he could knock. Lauren stood inside, fully dressed for work, coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other, as if she had been expecting him. Perhaps she had. For several seconds neither spoke. The winter wind moved across the porch. Finally, Lauren broke the silence. "You got home earlier than usual." Nash glanced toward the boxes, then back at her. "You changed the locks." "I did." Her tone remained calm, businesslike, prepared. No hesitation, no apology, nothing. Nash wasn't surprised. Only the timing surprised him. Lauren leaned against the doorway. "My attorney recommended moving things forward." There it was. Attorney. No more pretending. No more ambiguity. The marriage had officially entered its final stage. Nash nodded slowly. Okay. The answer seemed to catch Lauren off guard. Perhaps she expected anger. Perhaps she expected pleading. Instead, she received acknowledgement. Nothing more. Lauren recovered quickly. "There's paperwork coming." Nash looked toward the boxes again. Snow had already begun collecting on the cardboard. His father's toolbox sat near the bottom of one stack. The same toolbox he had owned for nearly 20 years. Lauren noticed where he was looking. "If you want anything else, you'll need to arrange a pickup." Still calm, still organized, still operating from a script. Nash wondered how long she had rehearsed this moment. Weeks, months. The answer probably existed somewhere. Maybe inside the documents he had already found. Maybe inside conversations he had never heard. Either way, it no longer mattered. "What happens now?" he asked. Lauren shrugged. "Now we move on." Simple, efficient, final. Nash nodded once, then stepped away from the porch. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. 7 years reduced to 2 minutes. The front door closed, the lock engaged. And that was that. Most people imagine betrayal as something explosive: shouting, arguments, broken dishes, tears. Reality often looks different. Reality frequently arrives in silence: cardboard boxes, changed locks, cold air, a door that no longer opens. Nash stood alone in the driveway. Snow continued falling. Several curtains shifted across neighboring houses. People were watching. Of course they were. Suburban neighborhoods always watched, especially when trouble appeared. A garage door across the street opened briefly, then closed again. Someone pretended not to look. Someone else failed completely. The story would spread by lunchtime. Lauren's husband got kicked out. Nobody would ask questions. Most already believed they knew the answers. Worthless men got left. That fit the narrative. Nash looked at his belongings, then reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began taking photographs. Wide shots, close-ups, timestamps, property condition, snow accumulation, every detail. The process took 15 minutes. A passing neighbor slowed his vehicle, then continued driving. Nash kept working. Documentation first, emotion later, if ever. When the photographs were finished, he made a second call. Aurora Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher answered. Nash explained calmly: no accusations, no drama, only facts. An officer arrived 30 minutes later. Young, professional, cold enough to look miserable. He listened, examined the situation, made notes, asked questions. Lauren eventually stepped outside. Her version sounded polished, prepared, reasonable. The officer remained neutral, exactly as he should. After 20 minutes, he completed an incident report. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic, just documentation, a record, a timestamp, a witness. The officer handed Nash a reference number, then left. Lauren returned inside. The door closed again. Nash loaded the boxes into his Taurus. The process required multiple trips. The snow deepened. His fingers grew numb. Still, he worked steadily. By noon, everything fit. Barely. The back seat disappeared beneath belongings. The trunk overflowed. The passenger seat held the final storage container. Nash looked at the house one last time. 7 years, birthdays, holidays, arguments, silences, promises, insults, all of it behind those walls, and none of it worth revisiting. He climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove away. The first night was the hardest. Not emotionally, logistically. Hotels cost money. Apartments required time. Friends asked questions. Questions required explanations. Nash wanted none of it. Instead, he parked in a quiet section of a 24-hour grocery store lot. The same Ford Taurus Lauren frequently mocked. The same car everyone associated with failure. That night it became shelter. The driver's seat reclined partially. Not enough. His back hurt. The heater cycled on and off. Snow tapped lightly against the windows. Denver's skyline glowed faintly in the distance. Nash sat alone beneath the dashboard light. A cardboard box rested beside him. Inside sat dozens of notebooks. One notebook contained everything: Crestline, Mercer, Lauren, the payments, the emails, the records, the evidence. For a long time he simply stared through the windshield. Then he opened the notebook, not because he wanted distraction, because he wanted perspective. The pages reminded him of something important. The story wasn't ending. It was beginning. Lauren believed she controlled the board. The company believed it controlled the narrative. Both assumptions rested on incomplete information. Around midnight, his phone vibrated. Rebecca Hart. Nash? Yeah, I received your email. Earlier that afternoon, he had forwarded updated documentation, including the divorce preparation files. Rebecca sounded unusually serious. Where are you? In my car. Silence, then a sigh. I figured. Nash looked at the frosted windshield. She moved faster than expected. I know. Rebecca paused, then asked the question she already knew the answer to. Did you react? No. Good. Another pause followed, longer this time. Finally, Rebecca spoke. Your documentation package is ready. Nash sat upright. What package? The one you've been building for months. He understood immediately. Every document, every timeline, every backup, every verification record. Rebecca continued. If something happens to the originals, we have copies. Good. If someone questions authenticity, we have chain of custody records. Good. If investigators ever need to review the material, it's organized. Nash nodded. Facts first. Always. Rebecca's voice lowered. Nash, I think we're getting close. Close. The word lingered. Because he felt it, too. The evidence was no longer scattered, it was taking shape, converging, forming a complete picture, a dangerous picture, one that involved executives, investors, money, and Lauren. After the call ended, Nash remained awake for another hour. Snow covered the parking lot. The city slept. Eventually, he reached into the passenger seat and removed a large sealed envelope. The first complete evidence package. Months of work, carefully organized, professionally indexed, legally documented, ready. At sunrise, he drove across Denver. The roads remained nearly empty. The envelope rested on the passenger seat beside him. By 7:42 a.m., he stood outside a private shipping office. The clerk weighed the package, printed a receipt, applied tracking labels, and slid it onto a conveyor belt. The envelope disappeared behind a partition. Gone. Officially delivered into the next phase. Nash took the receipt, folded it carefully, placed it inside his wallet, then walked back toward the parking lot. What he didn't know was that within days that package would begin a chain reaction none of the people inside Crestline Dynamics were prepared for, including Lauren, and including the journalist who was about to see his name for the first time. The call came 6 days later, 2:17 a.m., exactly as the freight elevator shuddered to a stop between the third and fourth floors. Nash was kneeling beside an open control panel when his phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. At first he ignored it. Most calls at that hour involved maintenance emergencies. Broken plumbing, power fluctuations, security access issues, nothing important. The phone vibrated again, then a third time. Nash removed one glove and checked the screen. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. His eyes narrowed slightly. Almost nobody from Washington called him, especially not at 2 in the morning. He answered. This is Nash. A brief pause followed, then a woman's voice. Professional. Controlled. Alert. Mr. Simmons. Yes. My name is Olivia Grant. I'm an investigative journalist with Forbes. The wrench slipped from his fingers and struck the concrete floor. The metallic sound echoed through the elevator shaft. For several seconds, neither spoke. Nash stared at the dark control panel. Olivia waited. Experienced journalists understood silence. Finally, Nash answered. How did you get this number? A reasonable question. Perhaps the only reasonable question. Olivia didn't seem offended. Through an attorney. Rebecca. It had to be Rebecca. No one else possessed both the information and the judgment. Nash stood slowly, The elevator machinery hummed around him. Cold air drifted through the shaft. "What do you want?" he asked. "To talk." "About what?" Another brief pause. Then Olivia answered carefully. "Crestline dynamics." The words settled into place. No surprise, no shock, just confirmation. The package had reached someone, and someone had taken it seriously. Nash looked around the empty maintenance corridor. Years earlier, he might have felt excitement. Now he felt caution. Journalists were not investigators, not lawyers, not judges. Their goals sometimes aligned with truth. Sometimes they aligned with headlines. The difference mattered. "What exactly do you think you know?" Nash asked. Olivia sounded prepared. "We've been investigating Crestline for nearly 4 months." "Interesting." "Not weeks. Months. That changed things." She continued. "We received tips regarding revenue inflation." Nash listened. "We found inconsistencies in investor disclosures." He remained silent. "We found former employees willing to speak anonymously." Still silent. "But we couldn't verify the internal structure." There it was. The missing piece, documentation, evidence, proof. The same thing every serious investigation eventually required. Olivia continued. "Your material appears capable of doing that." "Appears, not proves." "Appears." The distinction impressed him. Good investigators avoided certainty too early. "Appears?" Nash asked. "Everything must be verified." A reasonable answer, perhaps even the correct answer. For the next 20 minutes, the conversation remained cautious. Neither side revealed more than necessary. Neither side trusted the other completely. Nash asked questions, many questions. Olivia answered them patiently. Who had reviewed the material? How was it received? What verification processes existed? What legal protections applied? Who knew his name? Who had access? How secure were the files? The questions kept coming. Most people would have found them exhausting. Olivia seemed almost pleased. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Nash looked down the empty corridor. Something like that. The conversation ended without commitments. No promises, no dramatic speeches. Just an agreement to continue discussions later. After hanging up, Nash remained motionless beside the elevator for nearly a minute. The building around him felt different now. The evidence no longer existed only inside notebooks, or hard drives, or Rebecca's office. It had entered the world. And once information entered the world, control became impossible. 3 days later, Olivia flew to Denver. The meeting took place inside a quiet coffee shop near Union Station. Nash arrived early. Habit, preparation. The booth allowed visibility of both entrances. Another habit. At exactly 9 a.m., Olivia Grant walked inside. Mid-30s. Dark coat. Messenger bag. No unnecessary attention. She looked more like an attorney than a journalist. She spotted Nash immediately. Approached. Extended her hand. "Nash?" "Olivia?" Both sat. Neither ordered coffee immediately. The conversation started with credentials, verification, identification, background. Again, trust arrived slowly for people who valued evidence. Olivia provided documentation from Forbes, professional records, publication history, verification contacts. Nash reviewed everything carefully. Only then did the real discussion begin. For nearly 2 hours, Olivia walked through the investigation. What they knew, what they suspected, what remained uncertain. Nash noticed something quickly. She wasn't chasing scandal. She was chasing confirmation. There was a difference. Scandal sought attention. Confirmation sought truth. By the second hour, he found himself answering more questions than asking them. How did he find the drive? What verification methods had he used? How were backups created? Had documents been altered? What access permissions existed? The discussion became technical, extremely technical. Metadata, hash values, revision histories, forensic duplication, chain of custody procedures. Halfway through the conversation, Olivia stopped writing. For a moment, she simply studied him. What? She shook her head. I expected something different. Nash raised an eyebrow. Like what? Olivia smiled slightly. The narrative I received described a maintenance worker. Nash almost laughed. That's accurate. No. She leaned back. That's incomplete. The distinction mattered. Accurate and complete rarely meant the same thing. Olivia glanced toward her notes. You're speaking like a forensic analyst. Nash looked out the window. Snow drifted through downtown Denver. I used to be an engineer. Used to. The phrase sounded strange even to him. Olivia nodded slowly. Suddenly, several missing pieces made sense. The organization, the documentation, the patience, the caution, all of it. When the meeting ended, Olivia seemed convinced of one thing. The evidence deserved serious attention. Not publication, not yet. Attention. Verification came first. Weeks of it, maybe months. As they stood to leave, Olivia asked a question, one that caught him slightly off guard. Does your wife know? Nash thought about Lauren, the divorce plans, the hidden accounts, the insults, the locked door. No, Olivia nodded. Good. Why? Because if this becomes what I think it becomes, people will panic. The answer felt honest, maybe even wise. Outside, the wind had strengthened. They walked toward the sidewalk. Then Olivia stopped. Nash? He turned. She studied him carefully. There's something you need to understand. He waited. If the reporting verifies what you've uncovered, this won't stay private. The words carried weight, real weight, public consequences, news coverage, investigations, lawyers, executives, investors, potentially federal agencies. The scale could become enormous. Nash understood. I know. Olivia wasn't convinced. No, I don't think you do. The honesty surprised him. She continued. When stories like this break, everyone becomes visible. The sentence lingered. Everyone. Executives, board members, investors, Lauren, and perhaps Nash himself. For years he had lived quietly, almost invisibly, a maintenance worker, a forgotten husband, a man most people dismissed. Visibility carried risks. Olivia seemed to recognize his hesitation. The question isn't whether the story matters. She adjusted her coat. The question is whether you're prepared for what happens afterward. Neither spoke for several seconds. Traffic moved through downtown streets. A train horn echoed somewhere near the station. Finally, Olivia extended her hand again. We'll be in touch. Nash shook it, then watched her disappear into the crowd. The question remained behind. Not whether Crestline was guilty, not whether evidence existed, not whether investigations would come. Something more personal. Was he prepared? Because for the first time the truth he had spent months documenting was moving toward daylight. And once daylight arrived, nobody involved would be able to hide from it, including Lauren Simmons. The invitation arrived through Lauren's attorney, not directly. Nothing came directly anymore. By then, almost every communication traveled through legal offices' email chains and carefully worded documents. The message itself was simple. A final negotiation meeting would take place during Crestline Dynamics' annual investor celebration. Attendance recommended. Certain divorce matters could potentially be resolved. Nash read the email twice, then forwarded it to Rebecca Hart. Her response arrived 20 minutes later. One sentence. Go. but sign nothing without calling me first. That Friday evening, downtown Denver glittered beneath fresh snow. The Crawford Grand Hotel stood across from Union Station like a monument to money. Valets moved luxury vehicles. Investors stepped from black SUVs. Executives laughed beneath crystal chandeliers. Inside the ballroom, Crestline Dynamics celebrated what appeared to be another extraordinary year, at least publicly. Nash arrived wearing the same charcoal suit he had owned for nearly a decade. Pressed, clean, ordinary. The valet glanced at his aging Taurus and looked confused. Nash handed over the keys anyway. Inside, no one greeted him. No one expected him. He wasn't an executive, wasn't an investor, wasn't important, at least according to the story everyone believed. The ballroom stretched across nearly half the hotel floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Denver's skyline. Servers circulated with champagne. Large screens displayed company achievements, revenue growth, market expansion, future projections. Every number felt strangely familiar. Nash had seen the real versions months ago, and the real versions looked very different. He moved quietly through the crowd, observing, listening, collecting, the same way he always had. Near the center of the ballroom stood Lauren. Elegant black dress, confident smile, perfect posture. Several investors surrounded her. She looked exactly like someone winning, and perhaps she believed she was. Blake Mercer stood nearby, speaking with board members. His confidence appeared untouched. No visible concern, no signs of panic. Whatever Olivia and Forbes were doing remained invisible, for now. Lauren spotted Nash first. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, then disappeared. Professional smile, controlled expression. She approached. "I'm glad you came." The sentence sounded strange coming from her. Nash nodded. "Your attorney recommended it." Lauren laughed softly. Of course she did. Neither mentioned the months of preparation, the hidden documents, the secret accounts, the locked house. Those conversations belonged elsewhere. A young attorney approached moments later. Tall, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive confidence. Everything about him appeared expensive. Nash Simmons? Yes. The attorney extended his hand. Greg Callahan, Lauren's divorce lawyer. Nash shook it. Callahan smiled. "We may have an opportunity to simplify matters tonight." Rebecca's warning immediately returned. Sign nothing. The attorney handed over a folder, neatly organized, professional, prepared. Nash accepted it without opening it. "What is it? A proposed settlement?" "Of course." Lauren folded her arms. "We're trying to make things easier." Easier? Interesting choice of words. Nash finally opened the folder, several pages. Asset allocations, debt responsibilities, property transfers, financial disclosures. The details quickly became obvious. Very obvious. Lauren kept nearly everything. The house, investment accounts, savings, retirement contributions. Nash assumed responsibility for several debts, most of which he hadn't created. The proposal wasn't a compromise, it was a surrender document. Callahan watched him carefully. "Fair arrangement." Nash looked up. Neither answered immediately. The attorney continued. "Given circumstances." Circumstances? Another interesting phrase. Nash closed the folder. "I'll let Rebecca review it." Callahan's smile weakened slightly. "That may delay things." "That's fine." The conversation ended there. No argument, no negotiation, no drama. Lauren seemed irritated, not visibly, but enough. She had expected something else. Perhaps confusion, perhaps desperation. Instead, she received patience. Again. the same patience she had mistaken for weakness for years. The evening continued. Investors mingled. Executives celebrated. Champagne flowed. Meanwhile, somewhere else in America, a team of Forbes editors prepared to publish something that would soon change everything. Neither Lauren nor Blake knew it yet. Nash suspected the timing. Rebecca had hinted. Olivia had hinted. Nothing more. Still, the feeling remained. Something was approaching. Around 8:30 presentations began. The ballroom lights dimmed. A large screen illuminated the stage. Blake Mercer stepped forward. Applause followed. Confident. Polished. Professional. Mercer spoke about growth, innovation, vision, market leadership. The audience responded enthusiastically. Investors nodded. Board members smiled. The performance looked flawless. Until Nash noticed something. Mercer's phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. The executive ignored it initially. Most speakers would. Then it happened again, and again. The interruptions became impossible to ignore. Mercer glanced downward briefly. Only briefly, but long enough. His expression changed. Just slightly. Most people missed it. Nash didn't. The smile tightened. The confidence flickered. Then Mercer returned his attention to the audience. The presentation continued. Yet something had shifted. A board member checked his phone, then another. An investor looked confused. Someone whispered. Another whisper followed, like cracks spreading beneath ice. Invisible at first, then impossible to stop. Across the ballroom, Lauren's phone vibrated. She glanced down. Her expression remained neutral for exactly 1 second. Then, color drained from her face. The reaction vanished quickly. Years of corporate experience helped with that, but not quickly enough. Nash saw it. The same way he had noticed Mercer, the same way he noticed everything. Lauren opened the screen again. Read, scrolled, read again. Her breathing changed. Subtle, but noticeable. Nearby conversations slowed. Several executives suddenly stopped listening to the presentation entirely. They focused on their phones. A murmur moved across the ballroom. Growing, spreading, accelerating. Mercer's speech stumbled. Only one word. One tiny mistake. Yet it felt significant, because Blake Mercer did not make mistakes. Not publicly, not in front of investors. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Nash removed his own phone. The notification sat at the top of the screen. A message from Olivia Grant. No greeting, no explanation, only a link. And 6 words. It's live. Brace yourself. Nash stared at the screen. For a moment, the ballroom noise seemed distant, muted, like sound underwater. Then he opened the article. The headline appeared immediately. Large. Impossible to ignore. Forbes investigates revenue manipulation allegations at Crestline Dynamics. His eyes moved rapidly. Paragraph after paragraph. Documents. Internal records. Financial discrepancies. Investor concerns. Anonymous sources. Evidence. Verification. Months of investigation condensed into a single devastating publication. The article didn't accuse recklessly. It documented. Carefully, methodically, professionally. Exactly the way Olivia promised. Around him, reactions intensified. Phones appeared everywhere. Executives whispered urgently. Investors stood. Conversations fractured. The room transformed in real time. Mercer stopped speaking. Completely. Silence settled across the stage. One board member approached him, then another. Their expressions looked grim, very grim. Lauren remained frozen, still staring at her phone, still reading, still processing. The woman who had spent 7 years calling Nash worthless suddenly looked uncertain for the first time. Not defeated, not yet, but uncertain. And uncertainty was new. Across the ballroom, a television mounted above the hotel bar switched channels. A financial news network appeared. The anchor discussed a breaking story. Crestline dynamics, Forbes, revenue concerns, federal review possibilities. The words spread through the crowd like electricity. Nash slipped his phone back into his pocket. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. The evidence had never been about revenge. It had always been about truth, and truth had finally arrived. But as he looked across the ballroom, he noticed something else. 2 men in dark suits had just entered through a side entrance. Neither carried champagne. Neither looked like investors. Both scanned the room with deliberate focus. Professional focus. The kind that belonged to investigators. One spoke quietly into an earpiece, the other checked a folder, and both appeared to be heading directly toward the executive section of the ballroom. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like a trading floor moments before a crash. Phones rang, voices overlapped, executives huddled in corners, investors refreshed news feeds every few seconds, and above all of it hung a single uncomfortable reality. The story was public now. No amount of confidence could put it back inside a file. Nash stood near the rear of the ballroom watching the transformation unfold. An hour earlier, Crestline Dynamics had looked unstoppable. Now, uncertainty moved through the room like smoke. Invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. On stage, Blake Mercer had abandoned the presentation entirely. Several board members surrounded him. Their conversation appeared tense, urgent. One director repeatedly pointed toward a phone screen. Another rubbed his forehead. Mercer's expression had changed dramatically. The polished executive confidence remained, but cracks had begun appearing underneath it. The first visible signs of pressure. Across the room, Lauren still stared at her phone. She wasn't reading the article anymore. She was reading messages. New ones arrived continuously. Executives, lawyers, public relations consultants, perhaps investors, perhaps reporters. The source didn't matter. The effect did. For the first time in years, Lauren looked overwhelmed. Nash noticed something else. She was alone, not physically. People still surrounded her, but nobody approached her directly anymore. A subtle distance had emerged, a social calculation. Professionals were beginning to protect themselves. The instinct appeared quickly in corporate environments. When danger arrived, proximity suddenly mattered. At 8:57 p.m., a second notification appeared on Nash's phone, this time from Olivia. The message was brief. More outlets are picking it up. He opened a news aggregator. She wasn't exaggerating. The story had already spread beyond Forbes. Financial blogs, business reporters, industry analysts, investment newsletters. Several publications linked directly to Olivia's investigation. The process had begun, and once multiple organizations started reporting the same story, momentum became difficult to stop. A man in a navy suit rushed toward the stage. Another followed, then another. Each carried a phone. Each looked concerned. Nash recognized one from the documents. Corporate counsel, internal legal department. Not a good sign. Corporate attorneys rarely sprinted toward celebrations, especially not during investor events. A television screen mounted above the ballroom bar switched to financial news coverage. A scrolling banner appeared. Questions raised regarding Crestline financial reporting. The room grew even quieter. One investor set down his drink and walked directly toward the exit. Then another. Then 3 more. Nobody announced their departure. Nobody needed to. Actions often spoke more clearly than statements. Nash checked his phone again. A call from Rebecca Hart. He stepped into a quieter hallway and answered. "Rebecca, you watching?" "Yes." A short pause. Then Rebecca sighed. "They moved faster than I expected." Nash leaned against the wall. "What are you hearing?" "Enough." Her tone remained careful. Lawyers learned caution the same way soldiers learned discipline, through experience. The article triggered multiple inquiries. Official inquiries. Potentially. Potentially. Another careful word. Rebecca continued. "Several regulatory offices are reviewing the publication." Nash looked through the ballroom doors. Chaos continued spreading. "That was quick." "It usually is when investors start calling." That made sense. Regulators often moved slowly. Investors rarely did. Money accelerated everything. Before ending the call, Rebecca asked a simple question. "How are you holding up?" Nash considered it. The answer surprised him. "Fine." And it was true. Not happy, not triumphant, just fine. Because the story had never been about humiliating Lauren, or defeating Blake Mercer, or proving something to strangers. It was about documentation. Facts. Reality. Those things now existed independently of him. The call ended. Nash returned to the ballroom. The atmosphere had deteriorated further. Hotel staff quietly removed unused champagne trays. Music had stopped. Several investors stood near exits speaking into phones. Others clustered around legal advisors. Then Nash noticed Lauren moving toward him. Quickly. Purposefully. For the first time all evening she seemed uncertain. Not frightened. Not yet. But uncertain. The difference mattered. She stopped several feet away. "Nash." Her voice sounded tight, controlled, forced. He waited. "What exactly do you know about this?" There it was. Not concern, not curiosity, assessment. Lauren was measuring risk, calculating exposure, looking for information. Nash kept his expression neutral. "About what?" Her eyes narrowed. "The article. I read it." "That's not what I asked." A familiar silence followed it. Years ago, Lauren often filled silence. Tonight she seemed uncomfortable with it. Finally, she spoke again. "People are saying there are internal sources." Nash nodded. "That's what the article says." Lauren glanced toward the executive section, then back at him. For a moment, something almost like suspicion appeared, then disappeared. The thought clearly crossed her mind. Could Nash be involved? The possibility existed, yet years of underestimating him made the conclusion difficult. Lauren shook her head slightly, as if dismissing the idea herself. Then another executive called her name. She turned immediately. The conversation ended. Nash watched her leave. The moment lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it told him something important. Lauren wasn't certain anymore, and uncertainty often produced mistakes. At exactly 9:14 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. Two men entered, the same men Nash had noticed earlier. Dark suits, professional posture, focused expressions. They moved directly toward the executive section. No hesitation, no confusion, no small talk. People noticed immediately. The room seemed to inhale collectively. One of the men approached a board member, identified himself, displayed credentials. The board member's face changed. Nearby conversations stopped. Blake Mercer stepped forward. The second man spoke quietly. Mercer's jaw tightened. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation. Real investigations rarely resembled television. They resembled paperwork, questions, documentation, requests, and that reality felt far more unsettling. The interaction lasted several minutes. Eventually, Mercer nodded. One investigator handed him something. A document. Formal. Official. Important. Mercer read it once. Then again. His face revealed nothing, but the room understood. Something serious had begun. Meanwhile, news coverage continued expanding. Nash's phone vibrated repeatedly. Olivia. Rebecca. Unknown numbers, he ignored most of them. Instead, he opened the Forbes article again. Carefully. This time he noticed details he had missed earlier. Olivia had been extremely disciplined. Every major claim included corroboration. Every allegation carried supporting documentation. Every conclusion rested on evidence. Exactly as promised. The article didn't declare guilt. It established questions. Questions strong enough to demand answers. Questions powerful enough to shake a company. Across the ballroom, Lauren sat alone at a small table, phone in hand, eyes fixed downward. The woman who once laughed about Nash's career in front of strangers now looked very different. Not defeated, but no longer certain she controlled the narrative. And perhaps that was the first real change. Around 9:40 p.m., hotel staff quietly began dismantling portions of the event. Not officially, not publicly, but practically. Everyone knew the celebration was over. Nobody announced it. Nobody needed to. The room already understood. Nash slipped his phone into his pocket, collected his coat, and headed toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one noticed him leave. The same invisibility that had followed him for years remained intact, at least for now. Outside, snow drifted through downtown Denver. The air felt colder, cleaner, quieter. He walked toward the parking garage where the valet had moved his Taurus. Behind him, inside the hotel, executives continued scrambling. Lawyers continued calling. Investors continued asking questions. And somewhere in the city, investigators were beginning the next phase. The phase where headlines stopped mattering, and evidence became everything. What Nash didn't know was that the next 48 hours would change the situation even more dramatically. Because the article was only the beginning. The real damage would come from what investigators found after reading it, and several of those findings would lead directly to names Nash already knew, including Lauren Simmons. 3 weeks after the Forbes article appeared, Nash found himself sitting inside a federal office building in downtown Denver. The room looked exactly the way serious rooms usually looked. No dramatic lighting, no intimidating decorations, no television-style interrogation setup, just a conference table, a pitcher of water, several folders, and people whose jobs required patience. Special Agent Marcus Hale arrived first, mid-40s. Calm eyes, controlled posture, the kind of person who rarely wasted words. Beside him sat 2 attorneys from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Rebecca Hart occupied the chair to Nash's right. Everyone had notebooks. Everyone had documents. Nobody appeared interested in theatrics. That alone reassured Nash. Facts tended to survive better in rooms like this. Agent Hale opened the meeting. "Mr. Simmons, thank you for coming." Nash nodded. The agent continued. "We'd like to discuss how you obtained certain records referenced during the Crestline investigation." Straightforward, professional, expected. Rebecca gave a small nod. "Proceed." Nash began at the beginning. The abandoned drive, the server room, the discovery, the preservation process. Every detail, dates, times, locations, methods. Nothing exaggerated, nothing omitted. Only facts. The interview lasted nearly 4 hours. Throughout that time, Agent Hale asked surprisingly few questions. Most involved process, verification, documentation, chain of custody, not motives, not emotions. The distinction mattered. Investigators cared less about what people believed. They cared about what people could prove. Several times they paused to compare Nash's statements against existing records. Maintenance logs, security access reports, building entry data. Everything aligned. Exactly. At one point, an SEC attorney slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, server room images, security camera stills, timestamps, employee access logs. Nash recognized them immediately. The investigators had already confirmed much of his timeline independently. Good, very good. Independent verification strengthened everything. Halfway through the session, Agent Hale leaned back. "Mr. Simmons?" "Yes?" "Have you altered any of these files?" "No." The answer came instantly. Because it was true. The agent watched him carefully. "Not even once." "No." Silence followed. Then Hale nodded. "That's what our forensic team concluded." Rebecca smiled faintly. Not victory, validation. Different things. The meeting continued. Emails, financial records, executive communications, metadata, investor presentations. The mountain of documentation kept growing. Around noon, the discussion shifted toward Lauren. The transition felt inevitable. Her name appeared too frequently to avoid. An SEC attorney opened another folder. Several printed emails rested inside. "Can you identify this individual?" The attorney already knew the answer. Procedure required the question anyway. Nash glanced down. Lauren Simmons. His wife. Or soon-to-be ex-wife. "Yes." "What was her position at Crestline?" "Senior Marketing Director." The attorney nodded. "And did you observe any unusual interactions involving Ms. Simmons and Mr. Mercer?" Nash chose his words carefully. Observation. Not assumption. Not conclusion. Observation. "Yes. Please describe them." He did. The dinner. The investor event. Patterns. Behavior. Nothing dramatic. Nothing speculative. Only what he personally witnessed. Agent Hale took notes. The attorney took notes. Rebecca took notes. Facts entered the record, one at a time. Methodically. Exactly the way Nash preferred. Then something unexpected happened. Agent Hale opened a final folder. Unlike the others, this one appeared considerably thicker. He slid several pages across the table. "We'd like your reaction to these." Nash examined the documents. His expression remained unchanged. Inside sat bank records, transfer authorizations, financial statements, shell company transactions. Many looked familiar. Several did not. The investigators had obviously uncovered material beyond what Nash originally provided. A lot beyond. One account caught his attention immediately. Frontier Union Bank. The same institution connected to Lauren's hidden financial activity, the same one he had documented weeks earlier. Except these records went further. Much further. The transaction history stretched across multiple years, large sums, complex routing, corporate intermediaries. The scale exceeded even Nash's estimates. Agent Hale observed quietly. "What stands out?" Nash turned another page, then another. Finally he answered. "The volume." The agent nodded. "Meaning, these aren't isolated transactions." "Go on." Nash pointed toward the statements. "These are systems." The room grew quiet, because everyone understood the distinction. Mistakes happened. Systems required planning. The conversation moved deeper into financial structures, corporate entities, compensation mechanisms, disclosure requirements. Again, Nash focused only on what he could verify. Nothing more, nothing less. That discipline seemed to impress the investigators. People often wanted whistleblowers to behave like heroes, or victims, or crusaders. Nash behaved like an engineer. Engineers solved problems. Engineers documented evidence. Engineers trusted systems. The emotional narrative interested him far less than the factual one. The session finally ended around 3 o'clock. Agent Hale closed his notebook. "We appreciate your cooperation." Nash nodded. "Anything else?" The agent exchanged a glance with one of the SEC attorneys. Then he answered. "Possibly." Not surprising. Investigations evolved. Questions multiplied. New evidence appeared. The process rarely moved in straight lines. As everyone began gathering documents, Hale spoke again. "Nash." It was the first time he had used his first name. Nash looked up. The agent hesitated briefly, almost as if considering how much to say. Finally, he settled on something careful. "We've interviewed several individuals connected to Crestline." Nash waited. "Some interviews have been productive." Again, careful language. "Some haven't." That required no translation. Someone was talking, someone wasn't. The investigation continued. Outside the federal building, snow covered portions of downtown sidewalks. Rebecca walked beside him toward the parking garage. Neither spoke immediately. The day had been long, mentally exhausting. Eventually, Rebecca broke the silence. "You did well." Nash smiled slightly. "I answered questions. You answered them correctly." A meaningful distinction. Several steps later, she added something else. "Most people try too hard." Nash understood. Too many details. Too many assumptions. Too much emotion. Truth generally required less effort. When they reached the parking garage, Rebecca stopped walking. "There is something you should know." Her tone changed. Slightly. Enough. Nash waited. "The investigation is moving faster than expected." That wasn't necessarily good or bad, just important. "How fast?" Rebecca looked toward downtown Denver. Several seconds passed. Then she answered. "Fast enough that people are becoming nervous." People, plural, executives, attorneys, board members. Perhaps Lauren, perhaps Blake Mercer, probably both. Nash nodded slowly. He already suspected as much. The article had triggered scrutiny. The evidence had intensified it. Now consequences were beginning to approach. Real consequences. The kind nobody could ignore. That evening, after returning to his temporary apartment, Nash found 3 missed calls waiting on his phone. 2 from unknown numbers, 1 from Lauren. The first direct call she had made in nearly a month. He stared at the screen. Did not call back. Several minutes later, a text message arrived. Only 6 words. "We need to talk immediately." Nash read the message once, then set the phone aside. Outside, darkness settled across Denver. Inside, silence filled the apartment. 5 minutes later, another message appeared. Longer this time. Less controlled. More urgent. Nash read it carefully, then placed the phone face down on the table. Because for the first time since the investigation began, Lauren sounded worried. Not irritated, not arrogant, not dismissive, worried. And if Lauren Simmons was worried, it meant investigators had likely placed something in front of her that she couldn't explain away. Something documented, something verifiable, something powerful. What Nash didn't know yet was exactly what investigators had shown her, but he would soon find out. And when he did, one of the most important pieces of the entire case would finally move into the open. The divorce hearing began on a Tuesday morning in Arapahoe County. Outside, winter sunlight reflected off patches of old snow. Inside the courthouse, everything felt controlled, measured, deliberate, the way serious decisions usually felt. Nash arrived 20 minutes early. Not because he was nervous, because arriving early prevented unnecessary surprises. Rebecca Hart met him near the courtroom entrance. A leather folder rested beneath her arm. She looked calm, prepared, exactly the way she had looked throughout the entire investigation. "Ready?" she asked. Nash nodded. "As I'll ever be." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Good answer." The courtroom itself was smaller than most people imagined. No dramatic gallery, no packed audience, no reporters, just attorneys, court staff, and a judge whose time mattered more than anyone else's. Lauren arrived shortly afterward. For a moment, Nash barely recognized her. The confidence remained. But something underneath it had changed. The months following the Forbes article had not been kind. Crestline dynamics remained under investigation. Several executives had resigned. Investor lawsuits were beginning to surface. Board members were distancing themselves. And federal inquiries continued expanding. Pressure left marks, even when people tried hiding them. Lauren sat beside her attorney, Greg Callahan. A stack of documents waited in front of him. He looked determined, aggressive, prepared for battle. Rebecca noticed too. "He's going to push hard." Nash glanced toward the opposing table. "I figured." "He has to." Rebecca opened her folder. "He doesn't have much else." That statement proved accurate sooner than expected. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Callahan spoke first. For nearly 20 minutes he painted a familiar picture. Lauren Simmons, successful professional, responsible spouse, financial contributor, victim of an unbalanced marriage. Meanwhile, Nash became something else. Directionless, financially dependent, unable to contribute meaningfully. The narrative sounded polished, well-rehearsed, carefully constructed. Had Nash not lived through the last 7 years himself, he might have almost believed it. Almost. Callahan requested favorable asset distribution, limited financial responsibility for Lauren, several additional concessions. When he finally sat down, the courtroom fell quiet. Judge Whitaker made notes, then turned toward Rebecca. "Ms. Hart?" Rebecca stood. No dramatic pause, no performance, just preparation. "Your Honor, opposing counsel's presentation relies heavily on narrative." She opened a folder. "We would like to discuss documentation." Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Narratives could be debated. Documentation could not. Rebecca approached the bench. The first set of exhibits appeared. Financial records, bank statements, transfer histories, account disclosures. Everything properly organized. Everything verified. Judge Whitaker examined the documents carefully. Rebecca spoke calmly, methodically, like someone building a structure brick by brick. Mr. Simmons was accused of financial irresponsibility. Another document appeared. However, records show he maintained consistent employment. Another. Consistent debt payments. Another. Consistent savings contributions. The judge nodded occasionally, taking notes, watching carefully. Then Rebecca introduced the hidden accounts. The room became noticeably quieter. Frontier Union Bank, shell company transfers, undisclosed assets, transactions omitted from Lauren's financial disclosures. Callahan immediately objected. Several times. The objections failed. The documentation remained. Judge Whitaker studied the records for several minutes. Long enough to matter. Then she looked toward Lauren. "Mrs. Simmons, were these accounts disclosed during financial discovery?" Lauren hesitated. A dangerous thing to do under oath. Callahan quickly intervened, but the hesitation already existed. Everyone had seen it. Rebecca continued. "The second phase proved even more damaging. Electronic communications. Not personal gossip, not speculation. Actual records. Emails, messages, timelines. Nothing dramatic, only facts. The cumulative effect proved devastating. One document contradicted another. One statement conflicted with the financial record. A timeline failed to match. Then another. Then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Nash watched quietly. Years earlier, he might have felt satisfaction, perhaps even revenge. Instead, he felt something else. Distance. Like watching the consequences of choices finally arriving. Nothing more, nothing less. Around 11 o'clock, the hearing moved into testimony. Lauren took the stand. The confident executive posture returned. At first, Rebecca's questions remained simple. Professional background, financial disclosures, asset reporting, employment details. Then the questions narrowed. Carefully, precisely, like a funnel. Eventually, Lauren found herself discussing transactions connected to Frontier Union Bank. The same transactions she had failed to disclose fully. The same transactions already supported by records. The same transactions investigators had been reviewing elsewhere. Lauren's answers became shorter, more cautious. Callahan objected frequently. Again, and again, and again. The pattern itself became revealing. When facts accumulated, interruptions often followed. Finally, Rebecca introduced another exhibit. A printed email. Nash recognized it immediately. The message Lauren had sent nearly a year earlier. The one he discovered during her divorce preparations. Rebecca handed copies to the court, then waited. The silence felt intentional. Judge Whitaker examined the document. "So, this email predates the filing?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked toward Lauren. Again, another hesitation. Small, brief, important. The courtroom remained still. Rebecca allowed the moment to settle before continuing. Not because she enjoyed it, because timing mattered. Then came the issue Callahan clearly hoped would never appear. The affair. Not rumors, not accusations. Documentation, travel records, expense reports, meeting schedules, hotel reservations, patterns, enough evidence to establish a relationship between Lauren and Blake Mercer. Enough evidence to destroy several earlier claims. Enough evidence to damage credibility significantly. Callahan objected immediately. The judge overruled him. Nash looked toward Lauren. For the first time, she appeared genuinely unsettled. Not angry, not defensive, unsettled. The distinction mattered, because people often remained confident while fighting accusations. They became unsettled when confronted by proof. By noon, momentum had shifted completely. The narrative Lauren spent months constructing no longer aligned with reality. The documents refused to cooperate. Every attempt to portray Nash as financially irresponsible collided with records. Every attempt to hide assets collided with disclosures. Every attempt to simplify the story collided with facts. Judge Whitaker eventually called a recess. The courtroom emptied slowly. Attorneys gathered papers. Court staff moved quietly between rooms. Nash remained seated. Rebecca approached. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah." She studied him briefly. "You're not enjoying this?" It wasn't a question. Nash looked toward the empty witness stand. "No." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Good." That answer seemed to satisfy her. Because revenge and justice rarely traveled the same road. When proceedings resumed, the final decision didn't arrive immediately. Judges preferred caution, particularly when financial questions remained unresolved. Still, several rulings emerged, and each carried weight. Judge Whitaker ordered additional financial review, additional disclosure requirements, additional examination of certain assets. Then came the most important ruling of the day. The judge looked directly at both attorneys. Given the evidence presented regarding undisclosed accounts and ongoing investigations, This court is ordering temporary restrictions on the movement of certain assets. The room became very quiet, very quickly. Lauren closed her eyes briefly. Callahan wrote something down. Rebecca remained expressionless. Temporary restrictions. Not punishment, not guilt. Protection. The court was preserving options until more information became available, and that alone represented a major shift. Because judges rarely freeze financial flexibility without reason. The hearing concluded shortly afterward. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for unrelated cases. Nobody recognized Nash. Nobody followed him. The anonymity felt refreshing. As he walked toward the parking garage, his phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number, short, direct, only 5 words. "We need to meet. Lauren." Nash stared at the screen. The first direct message she had sent without attorneys, without intermediaries, without distance. Something had changed. The question was why. And judging by the urgency in those 5 words, the answer was likely connected to problems much larger than divorce court. 3 months later, Nash no longer lived out of a car. He no longer slept in temporary apartments. And for the first time in years, nobody called him worthless. Not because the world had suddenly become kinder, because the people who used to say it had become occupied with their own problems. Spring arrived slowly across northern Colorado. Snow retreated into the mountains. The sky seemed larger, brighter, cleaner. Nash had moved into a modest 2-bedroom house near Fort Collins. Nothing extravagant. A small backyard, a detached garage, a view of distant foothills. The kind of place most investors at Crestline would never notice, which made it perfect. His life remained simple. The biggest difference wasn't the house, or the neighborhood, or the absence of Lauren. The biggest difference was work. 3 separate firms had contacted him after the investigation became public: a cybersecurity compliance company, a financial auditing firm, and a data integrity consultancy based in Boulder. The last one interested him most, not because it paid the highest salary, because it focused on exactly the kind of problems he understood. Documentation, verification, internal fraud detection, systems, evidence. The language felt familiar, comfortable. For the first time in nearly a decade, Nash found himself doing work that fully utilized the skills he had spent years hiding. The transition surprised him, not because opportunities existed, because they arrived so quickly. Apparently, people valued individuals capable of identifying problems before regulators did. Who knew? On a warm Thursday afternoon, Nash sat inside a conference room reviewing an audit report. A junior analyst entered carrying a folder. "Mr. Simmons?" Nash looked up. The title still felt strange. "Yeah." The analyst handed over a document. "These came in for you." Several business cards rested inside. Recruiters, consultants, industry contacts. The list continued growing every week. Nash thanked him, then returned to work. The attention remained flattering, but attention had never been the goal. That distinction mattered. Several weeks later, Olivia Grant called again. This time the conversation felt different, lighter, less cautious. Trust had developed gradually through months of verification and reporting. The investigation had validated most major findings. Several federal inquiries remained active. Investor lawsuits continued expanding, and Crestline Dynamics had effectively ceased operating as it once had. The company still existed. Technically, but only technically. Olivia reached the point quickly. "I want to write another story." Nash laughed softly. "That's dangerous." "I'm serious." "I know," the journalist continued. "The first story focused on the company, and the second focuses on the source." Nash already disliked the idea. Olivia seemed to anticipate that. It isn't a hero piece. Good. It isn't a pity piece. Better. It's about documentation. That got his attention. Olivia continued. Most people imagine whistleblowers as dramatic figures. Nash looked out his office window. The foothills stretched across the horizon. They usually aren't. Exactly. Silence followed. Then Olivia made her request. An interview, a profile, a deeper look into the process, how evidence became truth, how patience mattered, how preparation mattered. Nash considered it carefully, then declined, politely, firmly. Olivia wasn't surprised. I figured. You already have the important story. Maybe. The evidence matters. Olivia laughed softly. You really don't enjoy attention. No. Not even now. Nash thought about the question. For years he had been ignored, mocked, dismissed. Yet attention still felt uncomfortable. Perhaps because validation from strangers never fixed old wounds. Perhaps because attention disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Either way, his answer remained unchanged. No. The interview never happened. Olivia respected the decision, and life continued. By summer, another development emerged. The federal investigation had triggered multiple settlement processes. Some individuals cooperated, others didn't. Several executives accepted responsibility. Several continued fighting. Blake Mercer occupied the second category, at least initially. That strategy proved expensive, both financially and legally. Nash followed developments only occasionally, mostly through public filings, sometimes through Rebecca, rarely through news reports. Distance felt healthier. One evening, Rebecca called unexpectedly. Guess what? Nash smiled. You never start conversations like that. Today I do. He waited. The Whistleblower Compensation Office finalized its review. Nash sat quietly. For a moment he wasn't sure where the conversation was going. Then understanding arrived. The investigation, the evidence, the protections, the documentation. Of course, Rebecca continued, the award was approved. Nash leaned back in his chair. Several seconds passed. How much? When Rebecca answered, silence followed. Not because the number was enormous by Wall Street standards, because it was life-changing by normal standards. The amount wouldn't make him wealthy, but it would make choices easier. Much easier. After ending the call, Nash sat alone in the garage behind his new house. The same habit remained. Workbenches, tools, notebooks, quiet. Some things never changed. He thought about the money, then about Lauren, then about the strange path connecting both. Years earlier, he would have imagined revenge feeling satisfying. Instead, it felt irrelevant. The money mattered because it represented freedom, not victory. A few weeks later, he used part of it to eliminate every remaining debt. Car loan, credit cards, medical bills, everything. The rest went into savings and investments. No luxury cars, no dramatic purchases, no public celebrations, just stability. The kind of stability he had lacked for years. One Saturday afternoon, while unloading supplies from a hardware store, Nash noticed a familiar face across the street. Mrs. Turner, a former neighbor from Aurora. She recognized him immediately. Her expression shifted. Surprise, recognition, embarrassment. Perhaps all three. She crossed the street. Nash, hello. The woman smiled awkwardly. I saw something online. Of course she had. Many people had. News traveled, especially when it confirmed how wrong previous assumptions had been. Mrs. Turner hesitated, then asked the question. The same question countless people secretly wondered. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Nash set a box onto the driveway. Tell them who you really were. The question lingered. Who you really were. Interesting phrase, because people often assumed identity came from explanations, titles, stories, introductions. Nash looked toward the mountains, then back at her. I did. Mrs. Turner frowned. No, you didn't. I went to work every day. The answer confused her, perhaps because it sounded too simple, perhaps because it was. The conversation ended politely, yet the encounter stayed with him afterward. For years, people had mistaken silence for weakness, patience for failure, humility for worthlessness. Those mistakes belonged to them, not him. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the foothills, Nash returned home. A letter waited inside the mailbox. No return address, just his name. He opened it inside the kitchen. One page. Short, handwritten. The message came from Lauren, not through attorneys, not through legal filings. Directly. Only 3 sentences. She wanted to meet. In person. Alone. No lawyers, no courtrooms, no intermediaries. Nash read the note twice, then placed it on the counter. Outside evening settled across Fort Collins. Inside, he found himself wondering something he hadn't considered in months. Not whether he would agree. Whether Lauren finally understood why she had lost. And somehow he suspected the answer would arrive during that meeting. The diner sat on the edge of downtown Denver. Nothing about it looked important. No expensive decor, no valet parking, no executives making deals over steak and wine, just coffee, chrome stools, blue vinyl booths, and people trying to get through ordinary days. The sign outside read Bluebird Counter. Nash arrived 10 minutes early. Some habits never disappeared. The lunch crowd had not arrived yet. A waitress wiped down tables near the windows. Country music played softly from overhead speakers. Outside, traffic moved steadily through the city. Inside, everything felt calm, predictable, the opposite of the previous year. Nash chose a booth near the back, ordered coffee, waited. Lauren arrived exactly 7 minutes late. Once upon a time, she would have considered that fashionable. Now it looked more like exhaustion. Nash noticed the changes immediately. The expensive confidence remained, but it no longer fit as naturally, like a suit tailored for someone she used to be. She sat across from him. Neither smiled, neither offered a hug, neither pretended. For several moments, they simply looked at one another. The silence felt different from the silences they shared during marriage. This one contained no tension, only distance. Finally, Lauren spoke. "You look good." Nash almost laughed, not because the compliment felt strange, because it arrived years too late. "Thanks," a waitress appeared. Lauren ordered coffee, nothing else. The waitress left. The silence returned. Lauren stared out the window briefly, as if searching for the correct opening sentence. Eventually, she found one. "The divorce is finalized." Nash nodded. "It is." No emotion, no celebration, just fact. Lauren wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. For the first time since sitting down, she seemed uncertain, not because she didn't know why she came, because she knew exactly why. And she suspected Nash already knew too. "I need a favor." There it was, straight to the point. Nash wasn't surprised. People rarely requested private meetings to discuss the weather. "What kind of favor?" Lauren looked down, then back up. "A statement." Nash waited. "A written statement." Still waiting. "Regarding Crestline." Of course. Everything led back to Crestline. The company had collapsed. Investigations continued. Several civil cases remained active. And although Lauren had avoided the worst legal outcomes, she remained connected to an enormous amount of unwanted attention. Nash took a slow sip of coffee. "What statement?" Lauren inhaled carefully. The answer clearly mattered. I need something confirming that I wasn't involved. The words hung between them. Simple, direct, impossible. Nash set down his cup. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then he asked the obvious question. Confirming what? Lauren's jaw tightened slightly. You know what? He did, but that wasn't the point. Facts mattered. Definitions mattered. Precision mattered. Especially now. Lauren glanced around the diner, making sure nobody was listening, then lowered her voice. The financial reporting. Nash nodded slowly. The shell companies. Another nod. The investigation. Silence. Finally, Lauren leaned forward. I didn't create any of it. Interesting. Not denial. Qualification. Nash noticed immediately. You participated. Lauren looked away. The movement lasted less than a second. But it was enough. People often answered difficult questions without speaking. Nash had spent years studying evidence. Body language occasionally functioned the same way. Lauren tried again. I wasn't the one making decisions. That's not what I said. The distinction mattered. Again. The waitress arrived with fresh coffee. Neither touched it. Once she left, Lauren reached into her purse. A folder appeared. Thin. Neatly organized. Prepared. Of course. She slid it across the table. Nash didn't open it. What is it? A draft. Of course it was. Lauren had always preferred prepared narratives, prepared explanations, prepared stories. The folder remained untouched. Nash looked at it, then at her. No, Lauren blinked. What? No. The answer arrived calmly, without anger, without satisfaction, without hesitation. Just no. For a moment she seemed genuinely surprised, not because he refused, because he refused immediately, without negotiation, without curiosity, without fear. Lauren's voice sharpened. You didn't even read it. I don't need to. The answer frustrated her. Nash could see it. The old dynamic wasn't working. The leverage wasn't there anymore. The assumptions had disappeared. Lauren leaned back, crossed her arms. For a moment he saw a glimpse of the person she had been for years, the version that believed pressure solved everything. You could help. Nash nodded. I could. Then why won't you? Another simple question, one that deserved a simple answer. Because it isn't true. The words landed quietly, yet they carried more force than an argument ever could. Lauren looked down. The diner suddenly seemed very small, very quiet. Several minutes passed, and then she tried something else, a different approach. You know what people are saying about me? Nash remained silent. Lauren laughed bitterly. The sound contained very little humor. I lost my job. Silence. My reputation. Silence. My future. Still silence. Finally, Lauren shook her head. I built everything. The sentence felt important, not because it was true, because she believed it, or used to. Nash watched her carefully. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry, or hurt, or disappointed. Mostly, he felt tired. Tired of narratives. Tired of excuses. Tired of people confusing consequences with injustice. Lauren eventually looked up, and there it was. The word. The one she had used for 7 years, the one she always returned to, the one she believed explained everything. You were worthless. The sentence emerged softly, almost automatically, like habit. Then she stopped. Because something felt wrong. The word no longer landed. No reaction. No pain. No visible wound. Nothing. Nash simply looked at her. calmly, patiently. The realization arrived on Lauren's face a second later. The insult had lost its power, not because she stopped believing it, because Nash stopped needing her opinion. The difference changed everything. For years, she believed she controlled the definition of his value, his success, his identity. Now she sat across from a man who no longer required her approval. And suddenly the old weapon became useless. Lauren looked away first. Not Nash. Lauren. The moment lasted only seconds, yet it felt strangely final. Eventually Nash reached into his bag, removed a thin folder, and placed it on the table. Lauren stared at it, confused. What is that documentation? The word alone seemed enough. Lauren didn't touch it. Nash opened the folder himself. Inside sat copies, emails, transfer records, meeting schedules, financial summaries. Nothing dramatic, just facts. The same facts that had survived investigations, depositions, courtrooms, reviews. The same facts that refused to change regardless of who told the story. Lauren stared at the pages, then closed the folder, slowly, carefully, as if touching it too long might make things worse. Neither spoke. Nothing remained to argue. The evidence already won, months earlier, maybe years earlier. Neither knew. Eventually Nash stood, placed cash on the table, enough to cover both coffees. The gesture felt strangely familiar. Simple, ordinary, human. Lauren looked up. Nash? He paused. For a moment she seemed ready to say something important, something honest, maybe even something real. Instead she remained silent. The words never arrived. Perhaps because there were no words left. Nash nodded politely, then walked toward the door. Outside sunlight covered the sidewalk. Cars moved through afternoon traffic. Life continued. Behind him, Lauren remained seated alone inside the diner. And for the first time in 7 years, Nash left a conversation with her carrying absolutely nothing. No anger, no regret, no need to prove anything. Only peace. Because some victories don't come from defeating someone else. They come from finally becoming immune to their judgment. 1 year later, the story no longer belonged to the headlines. The headlines had moved on. They always did. New scandals appeared. New investigations emerged. New executives fell. The world rarely stayed focused on one story for very long. But some stories continued quietly after the cameras disappeared. This was one of them. A cold autumn morning settled over Fort Collins. Sunlight spilled across the foothills west of town. The air smelled faintly of pine and approaching winter. Nash Simmons stood inside his garage organizing a row of labeled storage bins. Old habit. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Documentation, tools, records, order. The garage looked different from the one he once used in Aurora. Larger, cleaner, brighter. Yet the man standing inside it looked remarkably similar. Same calm movements, same measured pace, same preference for silence over noise. The difference wasn't visible from the outside. It lived somewhere deeper. In the absence of tension, in the absence of needing approval, in the absence of constantly defending himself against someone else's opinion. A year earlier, Nash had measured success differently. Not because he wanted to, because other people insisted on measuring it for him. Income, status, job titles, cars, appearances. Those metrics had dominated nearly every conversation Lauren ever cared about. Now they felt strangely unimportant, not meaningless, just incomplete. His consulting work continued growing. Organizations across Colorado occasionally contacted him when internal irregularities appeared. Most cases involved simple mistakes, poor reporting, weak oversight, Nothing dramatic. A few involved genuine fraud. Those cases reminded him of Crestline. And every time they did, he approached them exactly the same way. Facts first, documentation first, assumptions last. The process never changed. One Wednesday afternoon, Nash traveled to Denver for a financial compliance conference. He almost declined the invitation. Conferences rarely interested him. Too much networking, too much self-promotion, too many people explaining how important they were, but one client insisted. So he attended. The conference occupied a modern convention center near downtown. Hundreds of professionals moved through the building. Auditors, attorneys, analysts, compliance officers, regulators, people whose careers depended on details. Nash blended into the crowd immediately, exactly where he preferred to be. Midway through the afternoon, a panel discussion began. Corporate transparency and financial accountability. Nash chose a seat near the back. The speakers discussed reporting standards, whistleblower protections, risk management. Most of it sounded familiar. Then one speaker appeared on stage, Olivia Grant, the Forbes journalist. The audience applauded. Olivia smiled politely, then began discussing investigative reporting, case studies, verification methods, public accountability. Eventually, she referenced Crestline dynamics. Not dramatically, not sensationally, professionally, as an example, a case study, a lesson. Several audience members took notes. Others nodded. Most had never met the people involved. To them, Crestline represented a corporate event, an investigation, a news story. For Nash, it represented an entire chapter of life, a chapter that somehow felt both distant and recent at the same time. During the question and answer session, someone asked Olivia what ultimately made the investigation succeed. She considered the question carefully, then answered, "Documentation." The word immediately caught Nash's attention. Olivia continued, "The difference between suspicion and truth is usually documentation." Several attendees nodded. She wasn't wrong. Most people think investigations are built on dramatic revelations. A slight smile crossed her face. They aren't. The audience laughed softly. Olivia leaned forward. They're built on ordinary details collected patiently over time. That answer felt strangely familiar, perhaps because it described Nash better than any job title ever had. After the panel ended, several attendees approached Olivia. Nash considered saying hello, then decided against it. Not out of disrespect, because she was working, and because not every connection required maintenance. As he left the convention center, his phone vibrated. A message from Rebecca Hart. Simple, short, typical Rebecca. Case officially closed. Nash stared at the message, then smiled. Not a large smile, not an emotional one, just acknowledgement. The investigations, the lawsuits, the reviews, the years of uncertainty. Finished. At least officially. Some chapters ended quietly. This one did. The following weekend, Nash drove to Aurora. The trip wasn't necessary, which was exactly why he went. There was one final thing he wanted. Not money, not property, not revenge. A toolbox. His father's toolbox. The one that had sat in storage after the divorce. The neighborhood looked smaller than he remembered. Familiar, yet distant. Like a place belonging to another version of himself. Several houses remained unchanged. Several neighbors still lived there. Nobody recognized him immediately. And that felt appropriate. The storage unit sat on the edge of town. Nash unlocked it. The metal door rolled upward. Dust drifted through sunlight. Rows of boxes waited inside. Old photographs, tools, books, pieces of a previous life. He located the toolbox within minutes. Red metal, scratched paint, worn handle, nothing valuable. Except to him. His father had owned it for decades. The weight felt familiar in his hands. Comforting. Real. As Nash carried it toward the truck, he noticed something unexpected. There wasn't much else he wanted. Not from the marriage, not from the past, not from the story. Most of it could remain exactly where it was, because healing rarely came from recovering everything. Sometimes it came from realizing you no longer needed to. The drive back to Fort Collins took just over an hour. The Rocky Mountains stretched across the western horizon. Cloud shadows moved slowly over distant ridges. Traffic remained light. The radio stayed off. Nash preferred the silence. Somewhere along Interstate 25, he pulled into a scenic overlook. No particular reason, just instinct. He stepped out of the truck. Cool wind moved across the landscape. Golden afternoon sunlight touched the mountains. The view seemed endless. For several minutes, Nash simply stood there, thinking. Not about Lauren, not about Blake Mercer, not about investigations. Those chapters had already ended. Instead, he thought about something simpler. How easy it had been for people to misunderstand him. How often silence was mistaken for weakness. How often patience was mistaken for surrender. How often value was judged using the wrong measurements. The irony almost made him laugh. For 7 years, people looked directly at him and failed to see him. Yet the person they dismissed was the same person who eventually documented the truth. The same person who survived. The same person standing here now. Whole, peaceful, free. His phone remained silent. No emergencies, no legal updates, no urgent messages. Just quiet. The kind of quiet he once thought he'd never have again. Nash climbed back into the truck, placed the toolbox carefully on the passenger seat, started the engine, then drove north toward home. The mountains remained visible through the windshield. Steady, unmoving, patient. And for the first time in many years, Nash Simmons felt exactly the same. There is a difference between being underestimated and being defeated. Many people spend years trying to prove themselves to critics, doubters, co-workers, family members, or even spouses. Nash's story shows something different. He didn't win because he argued louder. He didn't win because he got revenge. He won because he stayed disciplined when emotions could have destroyed his judgment. While others built narratives, he built evidence. In real life, most battles are not won in a single dramatic moment. They are won through preparation, consistency, and patience. The people who appear quiet are often paying closer attention than anyone realizes. The people who seem ordinary may be carrying skills, experiences, and strengths invisible to the world around them. And when truth finally matters, appearances usually become irrelevant. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Have you ever had a moment when people finally realized you were far more capable than they believed? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone else who is going through the same thing right now. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story explores another quiet individual who was dismissed for years before a single unexpected event changed everything.